Kansas Ag Report. I'm Ken Rogers. On this week's program, our monthly conversation with Dr. Roger McEowen, who is an ag and tax law specialist at the Washburn School of Law. A couple of big announcements coming from the Supreme Court of the U.S. We'll talk about that with him. We'll also have features from the Kansas Soybean Commission, Kansas Department of Agriculture, and Kansas Grain Sorghum, along with a weekly update from the Kansas Livestock Association and market information from Pinion. Kansas Ag Report brought to you in part by the Kansas Soybean Commission, the Soybean Checkoff, progress powered by Kansas farmers. Kansas Farm Bureau, a grassroots ag organization representing the state's farm and ranch families since 1919, kfb.org. And the Kansas Wheat Commission, lending in the adoption of profitable innovations from wheat, online at kswheat.com. In agriculture news, Kansas farmers seem to be positioned for a bounce back in net farm income in 2024 as it rolls along, according to reports out from K-State University farm management economist Dr. Greg Ibendahl. While technically that's good news, it's tempered by the fact that Kansas farmers are coming off one of the toughest years in about a decade. K-State reported earlier this year that in 2023, the net farm income in the state was on average $89,667. That's about 56% below the year before, but in his most recent analysis of 500 grain farms in the Kansas Farm Management Association database, Ibendahl is predicting a 23 to 30% increase in net farm income in 2024 for Kansas farms. But that's really from a very low base to start with, he said. So overall, net farm income is going to be below what has been for the last 5 to 6 years. In pure numbers, Kansas farms may see 2024 net farm income hit an average of $118,000, according to Ibendahl. Now, in central and western Kansas, those numbers could top $156,000. Net farm income in the east, however, could be slow to $72,336, the only region in the state that won't see a rise compared to 2023. Signs are mixed for 2025, he said. Average net farm income for the state may be just below what's forecast in 24, but slightly higher for the west and east and slightly lower in the central part of Kansas. And drought notoriously impacts many facets of wheat production. Growers deal with reduced yields and shortened plant heights while facing other issues that cloud a crop's success. Little moisture also influences the result of post-wheat harvest herbicide applications. That, according to K-State weed specialist Sarah Lancaster. She said after harvesting weeds can be particularly challenging in dry growing season because of drought-stressed weeds and weeds that have been half harvested, not functioning like we want them to, she said, for achieving good control. She goes on to add a successful post-harvest herbicide program occurs when producers observe increased weed vigor and the weeds need to be actively growing for translocated herbicides, things like glyphosate, to move through the plant and kill it. She said also contact herbicides like paraquat or sharpen can need adequate leaf area to be properly absorbed, she said. Generally, you want to make sure that there's some regrowth in those weeds so herbicides work more efficiently, she said. So to control the weeds that have not sprouted after wheat harvest, Lancaster encourages producers to choose a herbicide with residual activity. You can find out more by contacting your local county research extension office. We'll take a break, come back, and I have a conversation with Dr. Roger McEowen when we return on the Kansas Ag Report. The Kansas Ag Report brought to you in part by Kansas Grain Sorghum, growers working together. Learn more at ksgrainsorghum.org. Grass and Grain, online or in the mail, keeping Kansas farmers informed for over 60 years. grassandgrain.com. And joining us once again is Dr. Roger McEowen, the Ag and Tax Law specialist at the Washburn School of Law. Joins us every month to talk about things. Good morning, Dr. McEowen.
Good to be with you, Ken.
Okay, this is one we've been waiting on. The time finally arrived, and I think many of us learned a couple new words in our vocabulary, Chevron deference. But the way it
Yeah.
came down, it looks to be broader implications than just agriculture, but many are calling this a big win for agriculture, some a little concerned.
Well, it could be. Of course, what Chevron deference is referring to is a 1984 opinion of the U.S. Supreme Court, where the court basically said then that the agency starts out ahead if you get into court. And what I mean by that is that their interpretation of what a statute said is going to prevail unless the other party that they're assessing a fine or a penalty or whatever against can establish that the agency's interpretation was arbitrary, capricious, and just completely unreasonable. And that's a pretty tough standard for somebody to overcome. So that's why I said you basically start out when you're battling an administrative agency and you lose in the administrative process. Once you get into court, the court will pretty much, under Chevron deference, bless what the agency said.
All right. So now that's been kind of changed. The other thing that came out
Mhm.
of this, Dr. McEowen, that a lot of people aren't talking about, I think they were so excited that Chevron deference was that announcement was made. Now,
Yeah.
also as a side to that, if you feel you were wrong, you could request a trial to go to
Mhm.
see if to see if you can win your case that way.
Yeah, a jury trial. And of course, yeah, you put those two together, no more Chevron deference in the court. Chief Justice Roberts said the agencies don't have any special competence in determining what a statute says. That's the job of the courts. So it's going to make it up to the courts to interpret what Congress has said, which is their role. But when you combine that with another ruling that came out the day before the Chevron ruling came down, and that involved the Securities and Exchange Commission, the SEC, levying a fine against a hedge fund operator on for alleged fraud. And the court said, well, this is like common law fraud, and under the Seventh Amendment, you're entitled to a jury trial for that. And so they said he is entitled to a jury trial. And historically, the same is true of USDA disputes involving ag producers. It's kind of what the rules were that the court was looking at with respect to the SEC is the same procedural rules that the USDA uses to levy penalties and fines. Same thing the EPA uses in the Corps of Engineers, for example, and that's pretty similar to the common law. And so the court would say, well, I've got a drainage issue, or I've got a swamp buster issue, or I've got a crop insurance fraud issue. Then you've got a right to a jury of your peers in a jury trial instead of just an administrative law judge and the agency acting as the jury and the judge and the executioner. You could go to court, request a jury of your peers, and have, for example, fellow farmers decide whether the agency was correct. Then you combine that with Chevron being gone. Those two are major sea change in the way we look at administrative law.
Well, it's going to be interesting how that all kind of plays out and how I guess they're tested and see
Mhm.
what that means. But it sure does look like that is a big change. So
Right.
we're talking with Dr. Roger McEowen for the Washburn School of Law, Ag and Tax Law Specialist. We talk with him every month. Let's take a break. We have more to discuss after this break. Kansas Ag Report brought to you in part by the Kansas Livestock Association, supporting members' business interests and meeting consumer demands. KLA.org. Oldie Seed Farms, carrying soil-specific seed. Find them on the web at oldieseed.com. That's OHLDE seed.com. And Kansas Corn, building the future at kansascorn.com. And our guest is Dr. Roger McEowen from the Washburn School of Law. As we talk about agriculture going through our judicial system, we've kind of wrapped up a little bit of what went on with the Supreme Court of the U.S. But another issue, though, that is always seemingly talked about in legal, and that's water. So you have some
Mhm.
updates there.
Yeah, there was a big water law decision decided by the U.S. Supreme Court just the week before Chevron came down. And of course, water in the West, basically starting west of the sixth principal meridian, from there west in the United States, is a huge issue for agriculture because of its relative scarcity. And sometimes states will enter into agreements to determine water usage of water that flows between the states. And of course, we're familiar with that in Kansas. A number of years ago, we had the Kansas and Nebraska enter into a compact. There's a compact with Colorado and Nebraska and Kansas. And these compacts get entered into by states periodically. And one of those ended up before the Supreme Court, and it was the Rio Grande Compact that was signed in 1938 by Colorado and New Mexico and Texas. It was then approved by the Congress in 1939. And that tries to equitably apportion the water in the Rio Grande Basin amongst the states. And also, not only did Colorado, under the compact, have to deliver a certain amount of water to the New Mexico state line, it established a minimum quality standard. And the U.S. government has a treaty obligation with Mexico to deliver a certain amount of water to Mexico out of the Rio Grande. And those water deliveries and management is done by the Bureau of Reclamation, which is headed up by the Department of Interior. So what happened in this instance was we had a dispute between Texas and New Mexico. Texas sued New Mexico for allowing the water reserves in the Rio Grande to be channeled away for its use, which they claimed was depriving Texas of its equal share of the water it was entitled to. And in 2018, the Supreme Court said, well, you got to bring the federal government in on this because they need to be a party to this because of their treaty obligations with Mexico, and the Bureau of Reclamation's involved, and you've got Indian tribes that also have water rights too. And to resolve the dispute, New Mexico and Texas entered into their own agreement. They came up with an agreement as to how they were going to solve this problem, never included the federal government. And the federal government said, no, wait a minute. You can't settle this thing. You can't enter into a consent decree without including us. We were brought in 2018. And that's what the Supreme Court said, that yes, the federal government has to be a party to this compact between the states. And I think the important point out of this, Ken, is that's not going to necessarily be the case in every situation involving a water compact amongst the states. But when there is a distinct federal interest like you had in this situation, then the federal government has to be a party, and that compact under the Constitution has to be approved by the Congress.
Okay, well, yet again, government must make sure they get their piece. I guess
There you go.
sounds like as well. Okay, Dr. McEowen, folks want to learn more about what we've talked about, other things that you have on your blog. How can they find it?
You can go to washburnlaw.edu/WALTR. If you want greater detail, I now have started a Substack, and that's McEowen Ag Law and Tax, all run together, .substack.com.
Okay, very good. We'll talk to you next month. Sure appreciate it.
Thank you, Ken.
Dr. Roger McEowen, Ag and Tax Law Specialist, the Washburn School of Law, has joined us. We'll take a break and have more in just a moment.
Many seed companies claim to offer the latest genetics, but how many have tested those genetics in soils just like yours? The Oldie Seed Know to Grow research program has fully tested the latest seed genetics in soils that are right in your neighborhood. The Oldie Seed Know to Grow program can recommend the best performing hybrids from technologies like Enlist, Extend, and LibertyLink that will optimize the yield and profit of every acre on your farm. Contact Oldie Seed today.
What does a brighter, more sustainable future look like in our cities and towns, and how do we get there? When New York needed an alternative fuel source to reduce carbon emissions, the city found what it needed in biodiesel made from U.S. soybean oil.
Kansas positions itself as a premier dairy frontier due to its wide open spaces, climate, water access, and proximity to feed sources, including soybeans. This is one of the fastest growing dairy states, currently sitting at 17th in production. Around 176,000 dairy cows reside in our state, according to current USDA survey numbers. Those dairy cattle consumed 165,000 tons of soybean meal in 2022, meaning dairy has taken the top spot for soybean meal consumption in Kansas. In addition to generating jobs and supporting small communities, the dairy industry in Kansas directly contributes a value of nearly $798 million to the economy, according to USDA. Including indirect and induced effects, the total impact reaches $1.4 billion in value. Dairy exports in 2020 totaled $124 million. The industry, already having achieved incredible growth over the past 25 years, continues to add about 3,500 dairy cows per year. Now, 75% of the milk produced within state lines is also processed in Kansas. This leads to greater economic power from retaining the impact of value-added processes. According to the National Soybean Checkoff, the United Soybean Board, soybean meal is highly digestible and provides affordable protein and energy for dairy cattle. Like with most livestock, the amino acids found in soybean meal greatly benefits dairy breeds. The cattle can convert the amino acids into nutrients that aid in milk production. Recent research posted on soymeal.org even dives into the effects of feeding high oleic soybeans, or those beans developed to provide greater oil content, to dairy cattle as a means to increase milk fat. June is National Dairy Month. Next time you enjoy your favorite dairy product, think about the soybeans involved in the process of making that product.
What if U.S. soybean meal were more than a commodity? If seed companies and the soybean checkoff built a better variety? That future is here. The time is now. To meet end-user demands, the soybean checkoff is investing in the compositional quality of soybeans, including meal. A message from the Kansas Soybean Commission, the Soybean Checkoff, progress powered by Kansas farmers.
Kansas Corn reminds you that E15 fuel is the right choice for every kind of driver. For the car enthusiast, E15 has higher octane. For the thrifty driver, E15 is priced lower than regular unleaded. For the nature lover, E15 provides cleaner air. For the shopper who buys local, E15 has more ethanol from our Kansas corn farms. Choose E15 for a higher octane, lower price, cleaner American fuel. Message from the Kansas Corn Commission. Learn more at kscorn.com.
The Kansas Department of Agriculture is excited to invite you back to Manhattan this summer for our 9th annual Kansas Summit on Agricultural Growth on August 21st. If you've attended our Ag Growth Summit in the past, you'll find that the 2024 Summit will feel different, beginning with the new location. We'll gather at the K-State Alumni Center on the southwest side of the K-State campus, which we know is a favorite spot for many of our Kansas Ag friends. Another change this year is that the summit will be on Wednesday instead of Thursday. This year's summit will keep all attendees together for the entire event, with no small breakout groups like we've done in the past. Instead, small panels of industry leaders will address issues and questions on the challenges and concerns that are faced by various agriculture sectors and discuss possible solutions for barriers that are shared by all. In addition, some special guest speakers will talk about international trade and other key issues for Kansas agriculture, which have a significant impact on the potential for growth. KDA will once again host a social event on the evening before the summit, so you're invited to join us at the Alumni Center on Tuesday, August 20th. The social has become a favorite event for many across the Kansas agriculture family. There's no cost to attend either the summit or the social, but it's important to register so we can provide enough meals and materials for everyone who is coming. Registration has begun for the summit at www.agriculture.ks.gov/summit, along with a link to reserve a room at one of the hotels near the Alumni Center. All farmers, ranchers, agribusiness owners, and industry professionals are encouraged to join us at the 2024 Kansas Ag Growth Summit for a day full of meaningful discussions that will further the agriculture industry in Kansas.
Green sorghum is one of the most important cereal crops worldwide, and Kansas leads the nation in its production. Over the years, sorghum has been either exported, used in animal feed domestically, or for other industrial uses. Recently, its use in the ethanol market has seen tremendous growth, with 30% of domestic sorghum typically going to ethanol production. Kansas Grain Sorghum is committed to sorghum research, market development, and education. Learn more at ksgrainsorghum.org.
It's now time for the Kansas Sorghum Update, brought to you by your staff at the Kansas Grain Sorghum Commission. The latest crop progress updates are in from NASS. For the week ending June 30th, Kansas sorghum condition rated 2% very poor, 5% poor, 39% fair, 46% good, and 8% excellent. Sorghum planted was 93%, ahead of 84% last year and near 92% average. Headed was 1%, near 4% last year and 3% average. Sorghum planted for all purposes is estimated at 3.2 million acres, down 11% from 2023. Area to be harvested for grain is estimated at 2.9 million acres, again down 11% from last year. Despite acres being down, global demand for U.S. sorghum continues to rise as showcased by a recent promotional mission to China by the U.S. Grains Council and the United Sorghum Checkoff Program in order to boost U.S. sorghum exports, connect with Chinese buyers, and understand the country's sorghum demands. Meetings were held with grain importers, government officials, and processing companies to present study results and discuss future U.S. imports, and a memorandum of understanding was signed with the Shandong government to collaborate on more promotional events. For years, China has remained one of the largest importers of U.S. sorghum. According to a study conducted by the Chinese Academy of Agricultural Sciences, forecasts indicate that China will stay reliant on 60% of U.S. sorghum exports by the year 2050. Thank you, and stay tuned for next time.
Imagine turning soybean oil, used cooking oils, and waste animal fats into fuel so amazing it drives U.S. jobs and our economy forward. Learn more about biodiesel at americasadvancedbiofuel.com.
The Farm Service Agency began accepting applications July 1st through the updated Emergency Livestock Assistance Program to provide financial assistance to eligible dairy producers who incur milk losses when cattle are removed from herds after having tested positive for highly pathogenic avian influenza, also known as H5N1. To apply, eligible producers need to submit to FSA proof of herd infection through a confirmed positive test on an individual animal or bulk tank samples, a notice of loss indicating the date when the loss is apparent, which is the sample collection date for the positive test, and an application for payment certifying the number of eligible adult dairy cows, the month the cows were removed from production, and the producer's share in the milk production. The final date to file a notice of loss and application is January 30th of 2025. The per cow milk loss payment will be determined based on an expected 21-day period of no milk production when a cow is removed from the milking herd, followed by 7 days when the cow has returned to milking but produces 50% of the normal amount of production. ELAP payments are determined using a per head payment rate that is calculated based on the monthly all milk price and national milk production published by the National Agricultural Statistics Service and a standard number of days with a reduced or no production. For more information or to apply, call your local FSA office.
The Kansas Wheat Innovation Center in Manhattan is rediscovering ways to get improved varieties and new genetics in the hands of farmers faster. Grower-led and checkoff-funded research initiatives are bringing about positive change. This grassroots leadership provides a strong voice in Topeka and Washington, D.C. Now is the time to partner with Kansas Wheat in moving wheat forward. Kansas Wheat Commission and Kansas Association of Wheat Growers. Farmers investing in their future and yours. Log on to rediscoverwheat.org.
Hello and welcome. Tanner Burning with Pinion Risk Management, giving you a commodity market update for the week of July 10th, 2024. Grain markets post July 4th weekend and the USDA planted acreage report from the end of June feel a lot different. Although we have been trending lower since last year's harvest, the constant pressure of what is poised to be large acres and potentially record yields for the feed grains are looming on prices. Producers across the U.S. are now looking up at potential for profitability if markets continue to push lower. The main driving factor, of course, has been favorable weather we have seen across the Midwest through June. Key growing areas are getting timely rains, and the threat to a hot, dry summer has failed to produce any rally. The long-standing short position held by fund traders has led all prices to where we are, and their grip has been rather tight. Funds rarely go short into this time of year and have never been bet this short the corn and bean market post July 4th. For corn, hopes of a return to $5 futures for December seem to be but a mirage in the distance as we jumped over $4.50 and threatened the sub $4 mark. While the cash corn market has a good basis to help hold cash prices up, your September corn contract is trading with a 3 handle in front of it. Realization of the market environment has changed, and that is the first step. Next up is making some key decisions to continue to hold or to take what the market appears to be giving us before things could potentially get worse. I encourage producers to pick their heads up and look outward to where we were pre-COVID days and just how bad prices were before we saw large-scale demand from the world for our ag products. That is the threat. Soybeans finally saw China come to the U.S. for crop year 24-25 export sales. This is the first we have seen since our prices have now brought us into the world market. But don't forget, South America has posted better than expected production, and our current state with the Chinese buyers favors them buying elsewhere. The question is, will prices go low enough to spur some more of this much needed demand? Wheat markets continue to decline as Kansas, Oklahoma, and Texas finish harvest at a breakneck pace. All things considered, the feel of better than expected yields has turned to some near farm records for production, giving us a black eye on prices. But to the same tone, we have seen an excellent export number the past 2 weeks from buyers needing the U.S. wheat. Take the rain, welcome the good crops coming, but drill into your numbers and protect what you can while you can from a cost and return basis before we get to harvest. When it comes to the following of the day-to-day moves in the ever-changing agriculture markets, we at Pinion Risk Management look to be a trusted source of information for our clients, along with being a guiding hand on decision-making and reasoning towards a market plan. To learn more about our approach at Pinion Risk Management, please give us a call at 888-452-8751. I'm Tanner Burning, and thank you for your time.
Many seed companies claim to offer the latest genetics, but how many have tested those genetics in soils just like yours? The Oldie Seed Know to Grow research program has fully tested the latest seed genetics in soils that are right in your neighborhood. The Oldie Seed Know to Grow program can recommend the best performing hybrids from technologies like Enlist, Extend, and Liberty Link that will optimize the yield and profit of every acre on your farm. Contact Oldie Seed today.
That'll do it for our program this week. Thank you so much for joining us. You can be social with us online at kansasagreport.net or our social media channels. I'm Ken Rogers. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll see you next week on the Kansas Ag Report.
Next time you see a beautiful field of corn, reach out and thank the farmers who work tirelessly to raise corn for livestock feed, renewable fuels, and exports to feed a growing world population. The farmers on the Kansas Corn Commission work for Kansas Corn with grower-funded checkoff dollars that support foreign and domestic market development, research, promotion, and education to expand opportunities for Kansas farmers. To learn more, visit kscorn.com.